Okay, so we're going to move into our next presentation, which is titled, No, Really, Which Search Engine Do I Use? Making a Guide for Finding Accessible Documents from Caitlin Malone. So I will let Caitlin come on screen and get set up.
Thank you. I'll just share my slides. And can you see my screen there?
Yep, we can.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So I wanted to start by saying thank you so much for having me. This talk is an overview of a process and a written guide that we created to help make finding and linking accessible library documents easier for our online courses. Sorry, I need to rearrange a little bit here. There. So first, a little about me. You may notice that I don't have my camera on, so I added a picture of myself here. I'm a woman with a light complexion, short brown hair, and glasses, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm Caitlin Malone, and I'm an online instructional designer focusing on accessibility at Indiana University's Teaching and Learning Design, or TLT. We actually changed our name just last week, so you may know us better as e-learning design and services if you've encountered us before. I've been training the team and documenting accessibility best practices since I joined TLT in 2018. I oversaw the library guide project that we're about to discuss. I also want to acknowledge the collaborators on this project. From Teaching and Learning Design, Carrie Hansel was our project manager, Rin Thomas was our resident PDF expert, and Rebecca Popek was our math expert. They both directly linked and fixed the documents in our project, putting in the bulk of the detailed work. From the IU Indianapolis Library, Sarah Lowe was our liaison who provided initial resources and feedback on our work products, helping us better understand the library system. From the Assistive Technology and Accessibility Centers, or ATAC, Michael Mace provided the original workflow we adapted into our guide, and Brian Richwine and Mary Storrs provided additional resources and feedback on accessibility. I mention all of our collaborators not only to give them recognition that they deserve, but also to show that this was a large project that required input across multiple campuses and departments. So here's a quick look at the agenda. I'll start with an overview of the project and discuss the IU library system, the problems we encountered, and the process we developed, and then the library linking guide we created to support the use of accessible documents. I'll go over the project results and deliverables, and then give some tips for reducing barriers in your own systems. I'll finish with some takeaways and additional resources. And so first, I'll give an overview of our team and the project. My team and I are from Teaching and Learning Technologies, or TLT, which is an IT division that serves all campuses in the IU system. We particularly support the IU Online program, which allows students to take individual courses or whole majors entirely online. The image on this slide is of our logo, which is stylized text of TLT and Teaching and Learning Technologies. Last year, IU Online began a major multi-campus initiative to create new fully online courses. One base course would be created by subject matter experts, supported by TLT, which could then be taught by multiple instructors in different semesters. We had to ensure that the content we created was accessible from the beginning, but as we were looking for accessible versions of PDFs, we hit a snag. There was no equivalent multi-campus library division that we could turn to. One course in particular was on informatics and law and contained 104 inaccessible documents. Of those documents, 58.7% were scanned, or essentially images, 36.5% were PDFs with text but were incorrectly tagged, and 3.2% were inaccessible Word document files. And a further 1.6% were PDFs with math equations, which can't be made accessible in PDF format at this time. Our goal was to find as many accessible files as possible to save having to fix or remediate all of the documents ourselves. And so the image on this slide is a bar graph that is just a visual summary of the errors that I mentioned. This project came with additional challenges. We had about a month before our course materials had to be finalized. Our team was unfamiliar with the libraries, as only one of us had used the IU libraries for research before. So this presentation is definitely from the perspective of staff who are just learning our library system. The course also contained specialized content in both informatics and law, and we didn't have a process created for this type of support task yet. On this slide, a man in a business suit looks out over an obstacle course with swinging pendulums and spikes. That's pretty accurate to how we felt when first going into the project. And so now let's look at an overview of our library system. And so my narration here is going to be a description of the visuals that are on the slide as well. So originally, we knew that there was a service called IU Catalog available at all campuses. We thought that meant that all 9 campuses would be unified under one library system, and we could use the catalog to search all resources on all campuses. This would obviously take some time, but we thought the process would be fairly straightforward. But in reality, it was much more complicated than that. As we started writing the guide, many questions came up, such as which of the many search engines should we use? How will we teach students to use the links that we create? Because they were not as intuitive as we first thought. Can we use interlibrary loans, or would that become a copyright issue? What are permalinks and the many different terms that they're called? We've heard of the IU catalog, but what's EBSCOhost? Once we find a document, how do we know if that format is truly accessible? Will this process really work for all students on all campuses? And perhaps of biggest concern, what should we do if the document isn't available? As we delve deeper, we developed a much more accurate understanding of how the IU library system works. Each campus library acts semi-autonomously, making their own agreements with databases and maintaining their own catalog. Therefore, a web search from one campus could come up with completely different results from another because availability was tied to the home campus of the individual doing the search. Since IU Indianapolis and Fort Wayne are covered under the same system, that left us with 8 different systems to try to understand. And the graphic on this slide is just a representation of that of 8 different campuses with their own agreements and search engines. So now let's look at an overview of the problems that we encountered. Campus access was the most significant barrier and also our biggest point of confusion. What we determined after discussion with the librarians is this. In the IU Online program, students are granted temporary access to the campus of the instructor teaching the course for the duration of the course semester. However, this may not be the same campus as the subject matter expert who built the course. Due to the short timeline, we elected to support the first campus to teach the course, which was IU Indianapolis, and provide instructions for future instructors to add their own links. We also had to request special access for ourselves to all libraries so that we could work on behalf of the subject matter expert. Another pain point was the confusion about databases. IU has 2 major search engines, IU Catalog, or also called IUCAT, and OneSearch. We determined that IUCAT is primarily for print and physical materials, with some links to external websites. OneSearch, which is also known as EBSCOhost, is primarily for online journals, periodicals, and some external websites as well. However, there was some overlap, and so while we primarily used OneSearch for our project, if we couldn't find a document, we'd also try IUCAT as well. A specific campus may also have only partial access to a particular database, no access at all, or has specialized databases or archives not covered by IUCAT or OneSearch. Since there is so much variation between databases, every relevant file format had to be checked for accessibility. Our main resources were EBSCOhost, ProQuest, JSTOR, and Hein Online, and the formats we checked were HTML, PDF, and Word documents. The results were mixed. Hein Online, a law database, only had scanned PDFs and a machine-generated text version that was largely unreadable. Almost all documents from ProQuest were accessible, and EBSCO had a mix. HTML formats were very accessible, while PDF formats were almost always inaccessible. JSTOR provided machine tag PDFs with accessibility errors, so we requested Word versions from the vendor and then made some additional fixes ourselves. The image on this slide shows the Adobe PDF accessibility checker with a number of errors and issues, including an image-only PDF error, missing tags, and missing figure alternative text. This was pretty common in most of the PDF formats that we reviewed. We also needed to link documents and courses. By default, links in the IU libraries include a feature called Easy Proxy, which helps students from the home campus easily log into the database. But the links wouldn't work for students on other campuses, even if they have temporary access through the course instructor. To account for this and to limit the number of links that we would need to maintain, we decided to remove the Easy Proxy and then make additional edits to the link. We also had to add instructions to the course telling students how to log in and access their documents. And so now let's talk about our project process. Originally, we began with a simple spreadsheet. However, managing the spreadsheet soon became my full-time role. So towards the end of the project, we created a more streamlined approach that used our internal project management software, but you could probably use a similar approach almost anywhere. We started with a top-level project folder, containing tasks for each document we needed to find. We then used custom statuses to indicate where in the search process we were for each document, whether it was found in the libraries, found but needed to be fixed, and so on. This also allowed us to have multiple conversations at once, as opposed to having a single chat channel that we were using before. In the future, we will also use the system to help us track our time spent and other data such as the number of documents, the types of issues, and average time taken for fixing documents versus linking them. On this slide is the process flowchart we used for most of our documents, but I'll summarize. First, we used the IU Indianapolis Campus One search, and if we couldn't find the document there, we tried IUCAT. Then, if the document still wasn't found, we would check topic-specific databases, which would sometimes produce different results. If a document was found, we would check its accessibility or rely on our original format review. If it was accessible, we'd edit the permalink and then add it to the course and test that it worked properly. If it was inaccessible, or if it couldn't be found at all, we would check copyright permissions and then fix anything that we could fix. If the document was an interlibrary loan, we decided what to do with those documents on a case-by-case basis, often directing the instructor to their campus librarian for assistance. As I alluded to before, collaboration was also essential to this project. We began the project by building off of campus library resources and guides, combining them with an accessibility workflow provided by our partners at the ATAC. We wrote the initial draft and then received feedback on it from Sarah of the IU Indianapolis Library and Brian and Mary of the ATAC. They helped us streamline our document and make it more usable, understandable, and accessible, even with complex image flowcharts. And so, what was the result of this library linking guide that we created? The guide started out as a large document, and any additions would only make it bigger. It ended up being 17 pages. We focused on step-by-step instructions, but we also knew that our audience might need some information to help them complete their tasks. So we provided a quick overview of each section, explaining briefly what they will do and why. We gave details of what to look for in each database, including both text descriptions and screenshots where appropriate. We elected to leave out some information that was useful but was too detailed to be easily used. For example, we did not go into detail about the different types of formats, databases, or the library systems. Are certainly not the experts in that and felt that connecting readers to their campus librarians was a better approach. Above all, we strive for consistency and reducing jargon wherever possible, so the process would seem less overwhelming. We refined the original draft based on feedback to fix errors and clarify confusing information. So for example, we had each step as a separate section, such as for searching, checking formats, and linking, with details for each database listed as subsections. However, this required readers to jump around the document, and so we changed it so each database had its own section with its own step-by-step instructions. The structure we settled on was much more cohesive. We began with a very short introduction explaining the library systems and key definitions, with no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs per topic. Next came flowcharts for the processes, and with an equivalent version and additional details in text. We finished with information on how to add and update links in Canvas, our learning management system, links to additional resources, and contact information for each campus library. The image on this slide shows a sample of the document, including the short overview and definition sections at the beginning. We hope to make additional changes in the future, such as adding more print databases, as well as multimedia resources such as academic video online and Canopy. We will also add updates from the libraries and the ATAC regarding IU's own policies of the new Americans with Disabilities Act Title II deadlines that are coming up in April 2026. We hope that creating customized versions for specific schools that highlight specific databases that are of use to them will help us share the guide throughout IU. And so now let's look at the results of our efforts. We spent a total of 218 hours working on 104 documents. 32.7% were found and linked in the library. 25% were found but contained errors, and 37.5% were not found at all, some of which were made by the subject matter expert. 1.9% were interlibrary loans, and 2.9% were duplicates of other files. The image on the slide is a bar graph showing the percentage of documents by category. And please review the slides on the OCUL website for full data. I'm just summarizing here, but overall, we ended up linking about 1/3 of the documents while fixing about 2/3 of them. In addition to the guide, we also created a flowchart for deciding how to fix existing documents, a set of library contact information and template emails our instructional designers could use with instructors, and updated our PDF and Word accessibility guides. An end of project report highlighting the barriers we encountered was submitted to upper management as well. And the image on this slide is a screenshot of the report showing some of the data listed in this presentation in a tabular format. And so now that we've looked at this project, let's take a look at some of the general tips we have for reducing barriers. When creating training materials, plan for new learners. If you have existing materials, you can start by identifying the most common questions you receive and adding them to the main content. With accessibility trainings and TLT, I found that short, self-contained topics allow me to quickly share information now, while giving me a foundation to build upon or adapt later. This might be in the form of short presentations, videos, or step-by-step instructions. Whichever format you choose, a reader or viewer should be able to complete a discrete task with the information provided. The screenshots on the slide show some of the presentations and a course that I've created with text and equivalent visuals. We also held a series of live sessions that were recorded for those who couldn't attend. The presentation slides and any supplementary materials were shared in a central place for easy access. When making instruction guides, aim for short documents that contain only the information needed for a task and supplement text with screenshots as needed. While training can support existing systems, our ideal future would be fully accessible libraries. If you are making purchasing decisions, you can advocate in your role and ask vendors about their tools' accessibility. You may not be able to always acquire tools and databases that are accessible, but bringing the conversation to the forefront shows that this is a priority for your institution. If multiple institutions ask these questions, we found that vendors are more likely to pay attention. If you're working with an existing system, you might need to create a process or a workaround like we did, but it's also important to communicate these barriers to vendors and to management so they are noticed and addressed. To support your case, look for opportunities to collect data on things such as file issues, hours spent, and potential impact to your institution and library users.
Caitlin, just a heads up that we have 5 minutes remaining.
Oh, yes, okay.
And you do have a question in the chat, so we'll want to leave some time for that.
Sure. I'll just quickly summarize then. Building relationships was really important through this process, and we have connections across the libraries, accessibility experts, our team in TLT, and also instructional designers throughout Indiana University who are implementing some of these solutions and advocating to instructors. And so the full slides, of course, will be available on the website, as well as I can make my script available too for more information. Just some quick tips for building relationships. We found that starting with something small that is mutually beneficial for all parties is a really good way to build those relationships in a kind of a low stakes environment that allows everybody to feel like it is beneficial to them. And so we're the smaller that it can be, the more there's an opportunity for natural conversations and establishing a rapport. And so finally, there's just a few takeaways that I wanted to cover as well. And so getting testers from students, faculty, or other staff in other departments helps give an authentic experience of the user experience. And then when you're deciding what to add to resources, try identifying the choices that people have to make. So if you are working as a library expert, how do you make this decision, and what information would someone else need to know to make the same choice? You can also look at what the core knowledge people need for to use the system, and also what kinds of questions do you typically get asked the most. And so you can focus on those aspects, add them to any resources that you already have, and then build upon those as more questions come in. And so finally, here's just a flow chart that summarizes the thought process that you might use when addressing barriers. So the first question is, can you fix it? And if yes, try to do so. This might mean choosing more accessible tools, or if you can't do that because you need a special tool or database, the next step you can do is ask, can you add supports to it? Can you promote accessible features of the database, or can you use tools to make accessible alternative formats? If all else fails, then the final question is, can you train for and document it? And this process can help you identify the root cause and just make sure that you're addressing it in the most efficient way as possible. So if, for example, you can fix a tool, then that means that you will always have a larger impact than merely documenting the issue. And so finally, I have a more resources slide. They include some of the guides that we have used for making documents accessible, as well as some software that I want to highlight. We use in Canvas Anthology Ally, the accessibility checker. We also found that MathPix has an OCR tool that has been very useful for converting PDFs that are scanned. And we've also had some success with the Pandoc conversion tool with LaTeX documents. So thank you very much. Sorry, I ran over a little bit, but I can just let you know that if you want to connect with me, my email is caimalon@iu.edu, and I can put that in the chat as well, and then pass things off to the moderators.
Thank you, Caitlin. So we'll just get to the one question that we have for you.
Okay.
So Kara says, love this project. Can I ask what the workload was like for those items that had to be fixed to become accessible? So we've just got 1 minute left.
The workload was pretty significant, and we did find that using MathPix significantly helped. We did find that probably it took 2 or 3 times as long to fix any particular document than to link it in the library. So definitely linking can support and if the documents are accessible.
Well, thank you so much for your talk. I certainly learned a lot. And do similar work at Carleton.